Hey, we're live. Okay, so do you want to share the...
I'll share the link. No.
Did you get the link?
Yeah, I'm on it. It's Umdat Ul-Ahkam 2.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead and share the link in the WhatsApp for the guys.
Okay, it's doing that right now.
Get the book open to Hadith number 5. So we are on a hadith about, let's see, what do we have today?
لا يبولن.
لا يبولن. Yeah, don't worry, I'll cut all this out, so
Oh, okay, inshallah. No worries.
we'll give them a minute if they want to jump on.
Inshallah.
There's Brother Muhammad. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa
Alaikum
barakatuh. Uzair, mashallah. How are you
salam.
brothers doing? Hope you guys are doing well. Francis.
Inshallah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, so maybe we should begin, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Yeah. Brother Khair, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're going to begin, guys. And you see the screen here. Is it clear? Hopefully it's clear, inshallah.
Wa alaikum assalam, Francisco. How are you doing?
Maybe I could probably zoom in a little bit. Let's see. How does that look, Abdurrab?
It looks, mashallah, great. The brothers, I don't know how. Can you guys see it properly?
That should be good. Remind me to scroll down, huh? If I forget.
Oh, inshallah.
We go from one hadith to another.
Khalas, inshallah.
Like, bismillah. So hadith number 5, we continue on. Hopefully everybody got a chance to watch the first stream. And we went through the first 4 hadith. We're in the hadith on purification from Umdat Ul-Ahkam, the compilation of hadith that are agreed upon by Bukhari and Muslim. It's a summarized compilation of fiqh hadith. So we're hadith 5, inshallah. Go ahead, Abdurrab.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: لا يبولن أحدكم في الماء الدائم الذي لا يجري ثم يغتسل منه. ولمسلم: لا يغتسل أحدكم في الماء الدائم وهو جنب. رواه بخاري ومسلم.
Jamil. You know, there's just a little bit of background noise from your side, Abdurrab. Maybe if you want, when you're not reading it or when you're not speaking, maybe, yeah. I think it's the headphone.
I'll mute it then. خلاص,
Okay. Are you using a computer?
I'm using the computer.
You might try without the headphone. Maybe the audio will be clear either way. Hold on.
You guys hear me?
Yeah, that's good.
1 second.
Yeah, you're good. Now there's no background noise.
Hello? Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Is it better?
Yeah, that's fine.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay, inshallah. طيب. So hadith number 5 عن أبي هريرة. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, لا يبولن أحدكم في الماء الدائم. Okay, none of you should urinate in الماء الدائم is stagnant water. So nobody should urinate in stagnant water. الذي لا يجري, water that's not flowing and running. Okay, so if there's water that's not running, it's not flowing, it's stagnant, it's sitting in one place, we should not urinate in that water. ثم يغتسل منه, and then proceed from there to make ghusl from it. Okay, so we see in this hadith, the Prophet Muhammad is prohibiting a person from urinating in stagnant water, and obviously there's harm to that. You're going to cause impurity in water that's not flowing, so that impurity is going to sit in one place, and somebody might come along and want to benefit or use the water or purify themselves from the water, and they're not going to be able to do that. Okay. ولمسلم لا يغتسل أحدكم في الماء الدائم وهو جنب. He said, nobody should make ghusl in stagnant water while he's in a state of janaba. Because again, the janaba will cause the water to become impure. So a person, the water that comes off of a body of a person that's in a state of janaba will become impure. Okay, so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ prohibited us from doing that. Okay, so basically, water that doesn't run, okay, is not, is not befitting to be used for ghusl and for wudu, and we shouldn't add any impurity, any najasa to water when the water is sitting. Okay. Now, when it comes to water in general, water is considered, the default is that water is pure, right? The default is that water is pure, unless, and we're going to summarize here, unless one of its qualities change. Okay, what qualities are we talking about?
The color, or the what do you say? The other one is
Regarding your question, Muhammad, if can you urinate in water if it's
the
still,
color.
if we're not using it for ghusl? Apparently, it would be yes. But if you think that harm might be caused by doing that, then you should avoid it. So if you think, if there's water that's sitting and it's stagnant, and somebody else might come to use it for something or benefit from it, then we should avoid urinating in stagnant water altogether. Now,
Would
so
we
the
also
qualities are, you said,
the color, the taste, and the smell?
the color, the taste, and the smell. Okay,
So would
so
we
those
also
are the three
say?
qualities.
I'm sorry, I'm cutting you
No,
off,
go ahead.
but I wanted to add to the question Muhammad asked. Would we also say, even if the water is moving, but we might know that the people ahead of us might use the water, so should we
Yes,
avoid it then too?
yes, absolutely. If you think that it might cause harm to anybody or anything, then we should avoid it, even if the water is running. Even if
Barakallah.
the water is running. But that prohibition or kiraha becomes more so if the water is stagnant.
Sahih.
Okay.
Barakallah feek.
Naam, fikum barak. So obviously, because of the harm that it would cause, because it's going to make the water impure, janaba, as is mentioned in the hadith, the state of janaba would make stagnant water become impure as well. So that's why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he mentions that. Now, the ulama, they differed between the ruling here being haram or being makruh, okay, or some they differentiated on what? On the amount of water. Okay, so some of the scholars, they differentiated on depending on the amount of water, because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said, إذا كان الماء قلتين لا يحمل الخبث. If water reaches two
Qullah.
qullas, which is a larger amount of water. Now I checked to see how much that translates to, and we're talking about something a little bit over 50 gallons of water. Okay, that's something a little bit more than 50 gallons of water, which would be around 2 bathtubs full of water. Okay, so if you have an amount of water in one place, that's about the amount of water that you'd have in 2 bathtubs. Okay, a little bit more than 50 gallons, that would be what would be considered qullatain. So more than that would be considered a larger amount of water, and less than that would be considered a smaller body or a smaller amount of water. The reason that's important is because of this hadith, because the Prophet Muhammad says in one hadith, if water reaches qullatain, that 50-gallon amount or more, then لا يحمل الخبث. It doesn't carry impurity. It doesn't carry impurity. Okay? In another hadith, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said, إن الماء طهور لا ينجسه شيء. That water is pure and nothing makes it impure. What that means is that by default, water is pure. By default, water is pure. Until one of those 3 qualities change, water is pure. So now I'm going to give you a very brief summary. There's a lot of discussion by the scholars about this issue here. Okay, you can read pages and pages on this. However, in brief, the most prominent view is that whether water is a small amount or a large amount, This was the view of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah and others. If the water is a small amount or a large amount, it's pure unless one of those three qualities changed. So it doesn't matter whether impurity fell into it or not, okay? Unless one of those three qualities changed, the water is still going to be considered pure until one of those three qualities changed, okay? If we want to go a step further than that, we can say for the lesser amount, what is less than 2 qullas, if najasa falls into it and the najasa is apparent, then we can no longer use that water. What's less than 2 qullas? If najasa falls into it, okay, and the najasa is apparent in the water, then what agreed upon by the agreement of the ulama, we cannot use that water, okay? If it's more than 2 qullas, we can say almost in agreement according to the majority. If it's more than 2 qullas, if it changes, it's najis. It requires change, okay, if it's more than 2 qullas. So just simply seeing some najasa fall into it doesn't affect it unless we see change. Jameel? And in general, whether it's a small amount or a large amount, if one of those qualities changed, then the water is no longer tahur, okay, and it can no longer be used to purify. It seems maybe a little bit confusing, but there's a lot of discussion on this topic, amongst the scholars. So I just kind of try to summarize that which we can hopefully remember and not get too caught up in a lot of difference of opinions and things like that. Jayed, let's go on to the next hadith.
عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: إذا شرب الكلب في إناء أحدكم فليغسله 7 ولمسلم أولاهن بالتراب رواه بخاري ومسلم.
أولاهن بالتراب، نعم.
أولاهن.
Do you want to finish the وله في حديث
وله في حديث عبد الله بن مغفل أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: إذا ولغ الكلب في الإناء فاغسله 7 وغفره 8 بالتراب رواه البخاري ومسلم.
جميل. So عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: إذا شرب الكلب في إناء أحدكم. Yeah, I did, right? You see it now?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Now it should come up now. If a dog drinks out of one of your containers, one of your utensils, okay, فَلْيَغْسِلْهُ 7. Then let him wash it 7 times. Your vessels, let him wash it 7 times. And in the other narration, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, if the dog, إِذَا وَلَغَ الْكَلْبُ, if the saliva of the dog gets into the vessel, فَغْسِلُوهُ 7, wash it 7 times, وَغَفِّرُوهُ الثَّامِنَةَ بِالتُّرَابِ. And here he mentions, and an 8th one with turab. In the first narration, أُولَهُنَّ بِالتُّرَابِ, the first of them with turab. Okay, so one narration mentions that the first should be with dirt, and then the washing of 7 times. In the other narration, he says, وَعَفِّرُوهُ الثَّامِنَةَ بِالتُّرَابِ. He mentions the dirt afterwards. Okay, what we can understand from this in general. Firstly, the saliva of the dog is najis. The saliva of the dog is najis. This is agreed upon. This we understand clearly from the narration, that the saliva of the dog is najis. And we know that studies have shown that the saliva of the dog carries certain diseases and filth and whatnot, so that it is najis. Okay, if the dog licks from a container or a vessel that we use to eat or drink out of, that's the vessel that's being mentioned here in this hadith. If the dog goes and eats or licks from a container that we use to eat or drink from, then that container becomes impure, requiring that it's washed 7 times, once with the dirt. and whatever food or water was in the container also became impure. Okay, so the container itself is impure, and whatever was in the container of food or water also becomes impure. Okay, according to the majority of the ulama, this does not apply to the hunting dog if he catches the prey. Okay, so the hunting dog, he's going to, grab the, whatever, the rabbit or whatever, right, from its neck with his teeth. That is not najis. Okay, so that part of the animal does not need to be purified 7 times and once with dirt or anything like that, according to the majority of the ulama. Okay, and that's because of a type of darura here, because the dog is being used for hunting. He's going to sink his teeth into this animal. How do you then go and purify that? The ulama, they said, no, you do not need to do that. Okay, now there are a lot of questions come up with regards to the dogs. A dog came near me. I think he smelled me. I think he might have touched me. What should I do? Should I roll around in the dirt 7 times? What do we do in this situation? As far as the clothing, the scholars, they made qiyas between the vessel and the clothing. The ulama, they made qiyas between the vessel and the clothing. Khair. So qiyas means that they made an analogy between the vessel and the clothing, and they would say, yes, the clothing becomes najis if you're sure that the saliva of the dog got onto it. Then the clothing becomes najis as well, and it needs to be purified. Okay, so based on the qiyas, okay, now not all scholars made this analogy, but based on this analogy and those scholars that did make that analogy, as it would be in, for example, the madhab of Imam Ahmad, okay, then you would also wash the clothes the same way. And there is proof for that. There is a narration from some of the companions, including Ibn Abbas and Abu Huraira. Ibn Abbas and Abu Huraira, there are narrations from them that they considered the clothing and the garments as well as the containers. Okay? Then scholars differed as to the dog itself. Is the dog itself najis? The dog in and of itself, is it najis? Or is it just the saliva of the dog? Here there's a difference of opinion. Some said the dog is najis in and of itself. I believe this comes in the madhab of Imam Shafi'i, that the dog and the pig are najis. Okay? Some of the scholars said the dog itself is not najis, it's only the saliva of the dog and the, obviously the filth that comes from the dog. If the dog, urinates and all of that, that's a najasa. And some said the sweat of the dog. So anything wet that comes from the dog takes the same ruling as well. Okay, but this is all ijtihad. All of that is ijtihad. The only thing that's mentioned in an authentic narration from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is what we have here. Okay, what about the narration from in Bulugh al-Maram, where we should wash the utensils with turab the first time, and another states the last time? Correct. One narration states the first time, and another narration states the last time. If we look at both of the narrations, the addition of the 8th is not a very strong addition. Okay? So the first narration, which says the first of them with turab, this narration is in Bukhari and Muslim with the addition of Muslim. So that's a stronger narration. The addition that comes, the 8th with turab, this addition doesn't reach the same strength as the first one. So the more authentic would be 7, the first of them with dirt. That would be the more authentic narration. Jameel? Regarding the addition of the 8th one, you mean, Mu'tasim? No. No. So the scholars, if you look into what the ulama of hadith, that they said they didn't see that addition to reach the same level of strength as the rest of the hadith. Okay, so if we act upon the first one is in Bukhari and Muslim with the addition of the first of them, ulahunna biturab, coming in the narration of Muslim. This there's no doubt about. So this would be the more correct way. Wallahu a'lam. جيد. We can go on inshallah to hadith number 7.
نعم. عن حمران مولى عثمان بن عفان رضي الله عنه أنه رأى عثمان دعا بوضوء فأفرغ على يديه من إنائه فغسلهما 3 مرات ثم أدخل يمينه
3
مرات ثم أدخل يمينه في الوضوء ثم تمضمض واستنشق واستنثر ثم غسل وجهه 3 ويديه إلى المرفقين 3 ثم مسح برأسه ثم غسل كلتا رجليه 3 ثم قال رأيت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يتوضأ نحو وضوء هذا وقال من تودأ نحو وضوء هذا ثم صلى ركعتين لا يحدث فيهما نفسه غفر الله له ما تقدم من ذنبه رواه بخاري ورواه مسلم.
جميل. طيب. عن حمران مولى Humran was he was freed by Uthman. So Uthman, Humran was a prisoner of war that was then freed by Uthman رضي الله عنه. أنه رأى عثمان دعا بوضوء. He saw Uthman call for wudu. Now notice here, if you're looking at the Arabic, the word here is wudu, not wudu. What's the difference between wudu and wudu? Do you know the difference, Abdul Rabb?
Allahu a'lam.
Wudu with a dhamma. Wudu.
So requested for water to make wudu?
Yes. So wudu with a dhamma is the action of making wudu. Wudu
okay.
with a fatha is the water that's used to make wudu.
To make wudu. Sahih.
No. Exactly. Okay, so wudu is the water that's used
with just a fatha.
With a fatha. Correct. Okay, so what we see here is wudu with a fatha. So da'a bi wudu means he asked for water to be brought for him to make wudu. فَأَفْرَغَ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ مِنْ إِنَائِهِ. So he then poured water over his hands from the container. So he started by washing his hands. فَغَسَلَهُمَا 3 مرات. He washed his hands 3 times. ثُمَّ أَدْخَلَ يَمِينَهُ فِي الْوُضُوء. Then he put his right hand into the water. ثُمَّ تَمَضْمَضَ وَاسْتَنْشَقَ وَاسْتَنْثَرَ. Then he washed his mouth. تَمَضْمَضَ. He rinsed his mouth. He took water into his nose. استنشاق. واستنشق واستنثر, and he blew it out of his nose. استنثر means he blew the water out. ثم غسل وجهه 3. He proceeded to wash his face 3 times. ويديه إلى المرفقين 3, and his arms up to his elbows 3 times. ثم مسح برأسه. He then wiped over his head. ثم غسل كلتا رجليه 3. He then washed both of his feet 3 times. ثم قال رأيت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يتوضأ نحو وضوء هذا. Then he said to the people, I saw the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم make wudu just as I have made wudu now. وقال من توضأ نحو وضوء هذا ثم صلى ركعتين. Whoever, then he said, whoever makes wudu and prays 2 rak'ats, whoever makes wudu the way I just made wudu, and then prays 2 rak'at, لا يحدث فيهما نفسه, without talking to himself in the salah, means that he's focused in salah, he's not allowing his thoughts to wander while he's in the salah. Okay, whoever does that, focuses in 2 rak'at after perfecting the wudu, غفر له ما تقدم من ذنبه, or as you read it in the other narration, غفر الله له, right? So غفر له ما تقدم من ذنبه, all of his previous sins will be forgiven. Okay, so there's a lot we can learn from this hadith. First of all, notice the way that, let me grab the charger here. The Uthman, he demonstrated for them, okay? And this is well known, yani, amongst the Sahaba and whatnot, that when you demonstrate something, I'm just going to plug in the charger.
نعم تفضل. So it's a means of showing them how to do the wudu and a way of learning.
Exactly. When you demonstrate something for somebody, then they're going to understand it much more so than if you explained it to them, right? Like right now we explained the wudu, but are you going to have understood everything just by hearing that? If you saw a demonstration, you're going to understand it much more so. So if men demonstrated for them in order for them to learn. We also notice in this hadith the sequence is followed, right? The sequence, just as it comes in the verse in the Quran, is always followed in any narration that we have about wudu. They always follow the exact same sequence, which led all scholars, if not all, the majority, the vast majority of them, to consider the sequence to be wajib. To consider the sequence, the order to be wajib. Okay? From this hadith, we see also, the virtue of praying after making wudu, right? The virtue of praying after making wudu. There's another narration when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ asks Bilal, what is it that you do? I saw your footsteps ahead of me in Jannah. Bilal said, there's nothing I can think of except that when I lose my wudu, I make wudu, and then I pray whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes easy for me to pray. So because of that action, the Prophet ﷺ was seeing the footsteps of Bilal ahead of him in Jannah. So there's a great virtue in making the wudu. You just purified yourself physically, right? And then you go from there to immediately praying 2 rak'at to get that spiritual purification as well. And the hadith mentions غُفِرَ لَهُ مَا تَقَدَّمَ, meaning all of his previous sins. It doesn't mention minor or certain types of sins. It says all sins will be forgiven. So
would
here's
that
an easy way to turn back to Allah. Naam?
Would that include the major sins, or for major sins you have to repent specifically?
Yeah, based on the generality of the statement, we can say that it's all sins. Based on the generality here, we would say that it's all sins. So here's an easy way, just some practical benefit for us. A lot of times you feel down, you made some mistakes, you committed some sins, you feel like you've gone a little bit further away from Allah than you should be. Whatever the case is, go and make wudu and pray 2 rak'ats. Look at the virtue of doing that. That will immediately increase your iman and bring you back to the path of Allah. Khair looks like madmada and istinshaq here is once. Naam. Madmada and istinshaq, he mentions them together. We know that from this narration and others that the Prophet Muhammad would take water with his right hand and take it into his mouth and his nose in one action. He would take them together into the mouth and into the nose in one action, and then blow it out with the left hand. Okay, so madmada and istinshaq are together. Jameel. Let's look at the next narration, and then we'll talk about the wudu a little bit, because the next one basically completes the meaning of this one. Go ahead, Abdurrahman, whenever you're ready.
عن عمر بن يحيى المازني عن أبيه قال شهدت عمرو بن أبي الحسن سأل عبد الله بن زيد عن وضوء النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فدعا بتور من ماء فتودع لهم وضوء رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فأكفأ على يديه من التور فغسل يديه 3 ثم أدخل يده في التور فمضمض واستنشق واستنثر 3 ب3 غرفة ثم أدخل يده في التور فغسل وجهه 3 ويديه إلى المرفقين مرتين ثم أدخل يده في التور فمسح رأسه فأقبل بهما وأدبر مرة واحدة ثم غسل رجليه. وفي رواية بدأ بمقدم رأسه حتى ذهب بهما إلى قفاه ثم ردهما حتى رجع إلى المكان الذي بدأ منه. وفي رواية أتانا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فأخرجنا له ماء في تور من صفر. التور.
Jamil, Jamil. You can stop there, inshallah.
بارك الله.
Okay, very good. So, Yasin, would it be disliked to do it separately? No, it's not disliked to do it separately. It's not disliked. It's perfectly correct to do it separately. But if you do them together, then you've come closer to the Sunnah, because it is mentioned when the Prophet Muhammad's wudu was described that he took them with one handful of water. So if you do that, you've come closer to the Sunnah, but it's not makruh, it's not disliked if you do them separately. Okay. Now this hadith also describes the wudu and wudu Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فدعا بتور من ماء. He asked for a container of water. فتوضأ لهم وضوء النبي. And he made wudu for them as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would make wudu. فأكفك على يديه من التور. He poured water over his hands. He washed his hands 3 times. Then he placed his hands in the container. Then he made madmada and istinshaq. واستنثر ثلاثا. He blew it out. That was 3 times. ثم أدخل يده فغسل وجهه. He washed his face. Then his hands up to his elbows. ثم أدخل يده فمسح رأسه. Then he wiped over his head. فأقبل بهما وأدبر مرة واحدة. He went back and forth 1 time. ثم غسل رجليه. Then he washed his feet. وفي رواية بدأ بمقدم رأسه حتى ذهب بهما إلى قفاه. In one narration, he began from the front of his head until he reached the back. قفاه means the back of the head over the neck. So, where the hair ends, إلى قفاه. ثم ردهما حتى رجع إلى المكان الذي بدأ منه. And he brought them back to the place where he started. So he started from the front, he went to the back, and he came back to the front. Okay, this is how the wudu of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was described. Okay, we see that in this hadith, some of the body parts were mentioned 2, and some were mentioned as 3, which means that it's okay to combine. If you washed one body part 2 times and another one 3 times, no problem, no harm in doing that. Okay, so you don't have to stick to the same number for every body part. The minimum is 1. Anything beyond 1, your wudu will be complete. 3, the second and the third, is for the sunnah and for the perfection of the wudu. If you did some body parts 2 and others 3, there's no harm in doing that, and it comes in the narration like that as well. So there's absolutely no harm. And if you did that at some point to actually follow the sunnah, then you will be rewarded for doing that as well, inshallah. Okay. And the masih is always 1 time. The masih is 1 time. It is not repeated. That applies to wiping over the head. That applies to wiping over the khuf or the jawrab, the socks, to wiping over a cast, or to wiping over, the imama that the Prophet ﷺ would wipe over at times. Okay, all of that is 1 time. The wiping is always 1 time. Whatever we're wiping, it's always 1 time. Okay, whereas washing the limb is more than once. No.
So based off of imama, it would also work for the hijab, right?
The Imam Shafi'i, he made a qiyas between the imama and the hijab, and this seems to be a strong qiyas because the ruling is the same. The asl, the default is that what applies to the man applies to the woman, unless we have a dalil to differentiate between them. So as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, as it came in the hadith, masaha ala nasiyatihi, and then the imama. He wiped on his forehead and then the imama. Okay, so the scholars, they explain that if there's difficulty in taking it off, if the person is traveling, or if there's any harm in taking it off, it's permissible to wipe over the imama. Similarly for the woman, if she's out, out and about, and she's not in an ideal place to take off her hijab, then it would be permissible for her to wipe over it likewise.
Okay.
Naam. And notice in the hadith, he says, "Man tawadda'a nahwa wudu'i hadha," right? Whoever makes this wudu that I've made. Okay. So what that shows us when we look at many of the ibadat and the orders of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what did he say about the salah? Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli, right? Pray as you have seen me pray. Al wudu ka wudu'i hadha, wudu like this wudu of mine. خُذُوا عَنِّي مَنَاسِكَكُمْ. Take your manasik from me, right? So we learn from all of that, the ulama, they gave us a principle, which is what? The ibadah is tawqifi, right? The ibadat are tawqifiyya, meaning that ibadah is only done in the way that we have been taught to do it. Okay, it's tawqif. You don't do except with dalil. You don't do an ibadah except according to the dalil. There is no ijtihad in having a new type of ibadah, right? Whereas in the adat, the customs and the daily practices of life, it's the opposite of that. Default is that it's hil, it's halal, except with dalil to make it haram. So the adat and the ibadat work oppositely. The ibadah, the default is haram, except with dalil to make it permissible. In the adat, in the daily practices, in the transactions, and all of that, even in the transactions. We have chapters on transactions, right? Business transactions. But the default in transactions is halal, unless we have something that's haram. You see? Those two are opposite. Is it known Abdullah ibn Zayd anhu did his ears? Because there's a hadith in Muslim Ahmad and I think Sunan Abi Majah. What do you mean did his ears? Like he wiped over his ears? The wiping over the ears is known in multiple narrations. Wiping over the ears is part of the head. No, if that's what you mean, yes, and it's in various narrations.
Meaning how? Wiping over the ears? I didn't get it.
I think Brother Mu'tasim is asking about wiping over the ears as well.
No? Oh, okay.
He put water in them. No. Put water in the ears.
Okay.
He would take a separate water. At times, it was narrated that the separate water would be taken, and yes, wipe over it in and behind the ear as well.
If I'm not mistaken, sorry, go ahead. لا.
Someone's making wudu and they reach the point of washing feet and they notice that the hair is dry. Can he start from the hair and work down the list, or redo it completely? Good question. If you're still in the process of making wudu and you notice that you missed something, you can go back to the point that you missed. However, if some time passes and you left the wudu, for example, and then you realize, or somebody pointed out to you that you made a mistake, then you go back, then you need to go back and start from the beginning. Okay? So if you realize later that you made a mistake and you're sure about it, not a doubt, okay, because remember that if you made wudu, then by default, your wudu is correct. Okay? Only if you're sure afterwards that you missed something, then you should go back and repeat the entire wudu. But if you're still making wudu and you realize you made a mistake somewhere along the line or you forgot one body part, then you can go back to the place where you forgot and continue from there. To maintain the order of the wudu. Jameel? Awzay? There's family that wipes over the neck and between the fingers. Wipes over the neck and between the fingers. Is this an innovation? Wiping over the neck is an innovation. Wiping over the neck is not part of the wudu. Between the fingers is correct. And washing between your fingers is correct because it's part of the hand. There's narrations about placing water between the toes and whatnot. Okay, so this is correct. It's part of washing the hands and washing the feet. But the neck, no. The neck is not part of the wudu. What about the athar of Ibn Umar? He used to wash the eyes thoroughly. La bas. I'm not familiar with the athar. It doesn't come to my mind right now, but la bas. The face is all washed 3 times. So it should be washed correctly and making sure that it's all of it is washed, including the eyes and everything. Nah.
So the water of masah could also be used to clean the ears, right?
Nah. The water of wiping over the head can be used to clean the ears as well. It's not required to take new water for that.
No.
Okay. Which also proves that that the water that you're using to make wudu, that water itself doesn't become najis. Okay, based on this, and other things that the scholars mentioned, the water doesn't become najis by using it to make wudu. So we can gather real briefly here, and I think we'll stop with this because we're going to get close to Isha now. Okay, what are the pillars of wudu? Okay, according to the majority of the ulama, we can say that the pillars of wudu are 6. The pillars of the wudu are 6. They are the face, and that which washing the face, and that which is included with it, of the mouth and the nose. Then the hands up to the elbows, the arms up to the elbows. That's the second one. Wiping over the head and the ears, that would be the third one. Washing the feet would be the fourth one. Okay, what's the fifth one? That's 4. We said there's 6. What would be what else is left? The fifth one is the order. Okay, as we mentioned. Intention is what? It's a shart. It's a condition. It's not of the pillars, but it's a condition for the ibadah. Okay, so the fifth one is the order, and the sixth one is what the scholars they call muwalat, meaning that you don't leave any gap between them. You don't leave any large time gap between two. Okay, so you don't take a long time. You don't stop. Not to delay, exactly. Not to have a long delay of time. Okay, so if you stop to answer a phone call halfway through the wudu and you're on the phone for 5 minutes, okay, then you go back, you need to start again. Some of the scholars, as Imam Ahmad did, and others, they measured it by the limb becoming dry, the amount of time that it takes for the limb to become dry. So if you stopped in the middle of the wudu long enough for your limbs to become dry, then you need to go back and start over now. But if you stop briefly, okay, if you stopped very briefly, you stopped real briefly to say something, to do something, to look at a text message or something like that, then you can continue and you don't need to start over. Okay. When we say the amount of time for the limbs to dry, that's in a normal situation. Meaning, let's say you're outside in the wind, okay, and the limbs dry immediately. So it doesn't mean if my arm dried by the time I got to my head, I need to start over again. No. So the amount of time it would take for a limb to dry in the normal condition. Okay. So if we leave a gap, we need to go back. So that's one of the conditions. How do we know this? Because in some narrations, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he saw somebody not wash a particular body part properly, like in one narration, he saw somebody not washing his feet correctly. He didn't perfect the washing of the feet. He told him to go back. He told him, "Irja فأحسن الوضوء." Go back and perfect the wudu. So he made him repeat the entire wudu. So here, when a little bit of time has passed, now the feet are the last pillar, right? It's the last thing that you're washing. He didn't tell him to go back and just wash his feet. He told him to go back and repeat the wudu. So this is one of the dalil that can be used for if time passes, that you should go back and do it all again at that point. Okay. No. Unless the delay is because of part of the wudu. So if you stopped for a minute, because you're taking off something or rolling something up in the midst of your wudu or something like that, there's no harm in that. That you don't need to start over because of taking something off, taking a wrap off, something that might take some time. Somebody has a wrap on and they need to take it off, and they didn't, it would be better to take it off before you start the wudu. But even if you did in the midst of the wudu, that's not considered a time gap. Okay, that's not considered that, because that's still part of the wudu. The action that's being done is considered part of the wudu. Okay. If I try lifting my trousers up to wash my feet and my hands feel like they got dried, do I make the wudu from the start? No. You don't need to start over in this situation, Daniel. Okay, because you're lifting up the trousers to wash the feet and your hands dried by lifting the trousers or something like that. No, you don't need to start over. Your hands don't need to, or do you mean that Do you mean that the water in your hand was intended to wash the feet? If you mean that you took water to wash your feet with and then your hands dried, then you need to take more water, yes. Okay? But if you mean that it dried in the process of lifting up the trousers to continue the wudu, so do I need to start over in that situation? No, you don't need to start over. Because lifting up the trousers here is considered part of the wudu. It's not considered leaving a gap or the limb being dry. What we mean by the limb being dry is somebody started making wudu. So they washed their hands, they washed their face, okay? Then they stopped for some reason. They stopped for any reason. They stopped in the midst of the wudu. Now that time extended. They were talking to somebody. That went on for a few minutes, okay? Now they come back to continue with the wudu and they realize the face is dry, the hands are dry. A few good minutes have passed. In this situation, we would say start the wudu from the beginning. Hope it's clear. Muhammad, my skin is very dry, and when I make wudu, it also takes me very long. So when I finished with my feet, my arms, no problem. That does not invalidate wudu. As long as you're in the process of making wudu, then pay no attention to anything drying, as long as you're in the process. The drying that we're talking about is if you stopped making wudu and went to do something that had nothing to do with wudu. Okay? So the issue is if a person stopped making wudu for something outside of the wudu, and then the limb is dried, then they should start over. But if you're taking your time making wudu, but you're making wudu, even if it took you 15 minutes, la bas, no problem. Okay? As long as you're still making wudu and you're in the process of making wudu, then you never need to go back and start over. Now, hope that's clear, inshallah. It does not invalidate it. I think we'll stop with that for today. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خير. Very good questions today, alhamdulillah. And we'll continue. There's 2 more hadith in this chapter before we go on to
باب الاستطابة.
جميل. طيب. جزاكم الله خير. بارك الله فيكم. Uzair is speaking during wudu makruh. Some of the scholars considered it makruh because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he did not respond to people that were greeting him with the salam while he was making wudu until he finished. Okay, so some of the scholars, they considered it makruh to speak because the Prophet Muhammad, but we know that the ruling on responding to the salam is that it's an obligation. It's a wajib to respond to the salam. So the fact that the Prophet ﷺ didn't do so while he was making wudu, some of the scholars said makruh. Some went as far as saying it's haram altogether. No. Can you make wudu naked? Yes, like if you're in the shower, for example, or something like that, you can make wudu while you're in there. No. You can make wudu while you're naked. No problem. No. Any other question before we close out? وإياكم. Barakallahu feekum. We'll see you guys inshallah.
بارك الله فيك وإياك. السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.